Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly workshop series. My name is Amy Doukoure, and I work with the Muslim Foster Care Association. I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker, Amy Doukoure, who's a staff attorney with CAIR Michigan. She's obtained her JD from the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law, and she has legal experience at the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy and the ACLU of Detroit. And today we're really looking forward to learning from her experience with upholding the legal and religious rights of youth in foster care. So if you have questions, she's happy to answer them. If you can write them in the chat box, and then we can answer them at the end of the presentation, or at the end you can unmute and ask your questions yourself as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and give it over to Sister Amy.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending today. This is a topic that is really dear to my heart. As Rich just said, I used to work for the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy as a pro bono legal attorney, working with families that were engaged in the foster care system on a legal basis. And it was work that I really enjoyed. A little bit to know about CAIR Michigan. CAIR Michigan stands for Council on American Islamic Relations Michigan. We are a local chapter of a nationwide Muslim civil rights advocacy organization, and we have three aspects to what we do. We educate both our community and the broader community about the rights of Muslims in different spaces. We advocate for those rights, and we litigate when necessary. So I was really pleased when Muslim Foster Care asked me to give this presentation regarding what the religious and legal rights of Muslim children are in foster care system. And I'm pleased to be here with you guys. And I know it's not easy to be here at 6:30 in the evening on a weekday when everybody has a lot to do. So I just like to go over first the objectives. The purpose of this presentation is informational only. It's not intended to be constitute legal advice, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship between any of the viewers or myself and or CAIR Michigan. And the intent of this presentation really is to provide just a brief legal overview of the religious rights of children in the foster care system and the ways in which state and federal laws act to protect those rights with regards to foster parents and foster placing agencies. So I've created a brief slideshow today to share with you guys. So we're talking about the religious rights of children in the foster care system. So this is our agenda today. What we're really going to try to do in the next hour or less is talk about where our religious rights come from, and how those religious, federally protected religious rights apply to minors. We're going to talk about the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and we're going to talk about the state of Michigan specific. How do the federal laws protect the religious rights of children in foster care, and what Michigan specific laws and regulations protect the rights of and kind of balance the way we act regarding religious rights of children in foster care. What the responsibilities of the agencies are and the foster parents, and what the needs of Muslim children are in foster care. So that's kind of briefly what we're going to go over today. So just as a basic primer, our rights to religious freedom come from the U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects a lot of things, protects free speech, protects freedom of the press, but fundamentally it has two clauses that protect our religious rights. The first clause is the Free Exercise Clause, and which prohibits the rights of, prohibits the government from restricting religious exercise or expression without a compelling government interest. And kind of how I explain this to people is the government, if you have a sincerely held religious belief that you should be doing something or you should be abstaining from something, the government has to have a really, really good reason as to why they would stop you from doing that. And the reason has to be related to something that they're entitled to do, something like protect the health and welfare and safety of everybody. It can't just be because they don't understand or they don't know why you're doing what you're doing. So the test really is your sincerely held belief. It's a subjective test based on the religious belief of the individual that's being whose actions are being restricted. And then we have the Establishment Clause, and what the Establishment Clause really kind of prohibits the state and federal government from sponsoring through financial support or active involvement, or even by prohibition from sponsoring or disenfranchising one religion over another. We see this a lot with regards to schools. This has been litigated in public school with regards to having Bible studies in public schools or prayer in public school, or even little something as simple as reciting the Pledge of Allegiance was challenged based on an Establishment Clause grounds. So we generally think that the Constitution of the United States protects our rights from the federal government, which is true. And it was intended really to only protect our rights from the federal government until we had the enactment of the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment has several clauses, but the clause that we really are focused on in this workshop is the Equal Protection Clause. And the Equal Protection Clause creates a requirement that states uphold the constitutional rights of all persons within its jurisdiction equally. And the word that we should really be focusing on when we're talking about the 14th Amendment is the term persons. So sometimes we think of constitutional rights protecting citizens of the United States, but that's not true. The Constitution of the United States protects all persons that are found inside the United States. And the 14th Amendment specifically requires states to uphold the rights of all persons found within its jurisdiction, meaning all persons that are located in the state. And what that really means is it doesn't matter a person's immigration status in the United States. They have all of the constitutional rights that are afforded to U.S. citizens. So for instance, if somebody's over here on a visitor's visa, or somebody's here on a student visa or a work visa, they have all of the same rights protected through the 14th Amendment as somebody who, say, is a native-born U.S. citizen. And the same is true for people who are undocumented, even refugees or people who are here who are maybe undocumented immigrants. They also have the same constitutional rights as native born or naturalized citizens and lawful permanent residents. So the Constitution really protects all people who are found within the borders of the United States. So when we talk about kids, right, I always, kids enjoy a special status in the United States as being, protected, from by their parents, right? So we say that children are not fully recognized adults. We have this idea about the age of majority being 18, and when you become 18, that's when you have your rights, right? I mean, I tell my children this all the time, like, you don't have a right to privacy in my house. I can look at your phone. I'm opening your bedroom door if I want, and they'll always be like, you're invading my right to privacy. And I always tell them, your right to privacy is protected from the government. I am not the government, which means you cannot be protected from my invasion of your privacy. But so that is true. So legal minors don't necessarily have all of the rights in their home that normally they would have, like in society. But really, when we're talking about legal rights, the full rights of the U.S. Constitution protect our children. So if an adult person, a person who's 18, 25, 55, 65, 105, has a constitutional right, a 5-year-old has that same right, and it's fully protected by the U.S. Constitution. There's a long series of case law, including case law from the Supreme Court of the United States, that recognize that minors enjoy all of the same constitutional protections and rights as adults, but for the right to vote. The right to vote is explicitly written to apply only to those over 18, so they don't have that right. But when it comes to their right to freedom of speech, their right to freedom of religion, their right to be free from unwarranted search and seizure, when it comes to law enforcement, all of those rights are fully protected by the Constitution. And what we really see this play out in is we have seen this play out a lot in with regards to First Amendment rights, mostly in the context of whether or not children have free speech in the public school system, for instance. And what we've seen is that, yes, absolutely, even in public schools, even in a school where the government has a right to create regulations to make sure that public schools are orderly and everybody is entitled to an education, even then children are entitled to exercise their free speech rights. And that includes their free speech and their religious rights by the US Constitution. What we also see is that the parents and children enjoy reciprocal rights that are derived necessarily and directly from the parent-child relationship, right? So the US Constitution protects the right of the parent to provide for their children as they see fit with regards to their moral and religious upbringing, as well as their health. And the state is only allowed to step in if there's a need to do so based on securing the health, safety, or welfare of the minor child. And the Equal Protection Clause has been used by the parent to bring actions on behalf of their minor children. And what we see from that line of cases is that right is reciprocal. So the parents have the right to exercise the rights of their minor child. So the parents can bring an action on behalf of the minor child if their rights have been infringed upon. But the children can also bring a cause of action, a lawsuit on their own to enforce their own rights. And so we see this, we see children being able to bring lawsuits on behalf of themselves when they've been deprived of the rights to have their parents guide their upbringing. So sometimes we think that the parents we treat parents as having these rights with children interchangeably, which is true. The rights are interchangeable. They belong both to the parent and the child at the same time. But the rights, the rights of the child are also derived separate from their parents. So, and this is kind of unique. And when we talk about the foster care protective services proceedings, because there is a right of a child and a parent to remain together and remain together as a family. But when we have child protective services involved, we know that there is some infringement of that right based on a need of the child, right? And it's always based on the need of the child. And that could be done voluntarily by a child entering foster care voluntarily based on the child, or because the parent left the child without proper care and custody, but it's always based on the need of the child. So the laws recognize that that there is a right to preservation of the family integrity, and that the reciprocal rights of both parents is the children have a right and an interest in the parent companionship, the care of the parent and the management of the parent over their health, welfare, and their religious upbringing, that's derived from their emotional attachments. And what we see also in these reciprocal rights, these constitutional rights, is that parents, even when their child is in the foster care proceedings, if their rights have not been terminated, parents have the right to direct the care and custody of their minor child. And that includes making decisions regarding their health, making decisions regarding their education, and making decisions regarding their religious upbringing. And we've seen cases. I saw a case when I worked for the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy, where a set of children came into care and custody of the state of Michigan because the parents had been removed from the United States back to Mexico. It's like more commonly called deportation. They've been deported to Mexico. And as a result of that, the minor children who were US citizens were not deported. The United States doesn't deport US citizens even because their parents are undocumented immigrants here. So the children remained in the United States, and the parents went to Mexico, and the children entered the foster care system. And we saw the state requiring foster parents and foster placing agencies to contact the parents and have regular communication with the parents in Mexico to assist them in making decisions about major decisions about the child, because fit parents are presumed to be acting in the best interest of their child. Legally, that's a legal presumption. So unless the decision is against the great weight of the health and welfare of the minor child, the parents enjoy that right, even when they're not inside of the United States. And because of the reciprocal rights that are derived between parent and child, the child is also entitled to have that regular communication with their parents that is unfettered and unmonitored and unrestricted within reasonable means to their parents, so that they can enjoy that relationship as well, and so that they can receive the input from their parents. What we also see is that in addition to the constitutional rights that are afforded to children and the reciprocal rights that are derived from the parent-child relationship as a result of the constitutional protections afforded to the parent, the federal government has really went into some great length to ensure that minors, especially those in foster care, have their constitutional rights protected. So they've enacted a series of laws. I'm not going to go over them all here. Not all of them are relevant, but just to list a few, we have the Indian Child Welfare Act. There's an act for the Civil Rights of Children, which is under 1983, which is civil rights, the statute that allows children to bring a lawsuit on their own behalf. We have the Child Abuse Prevention and Adoption Reform Act, Social Security Act, and with the development of the Children's Bureau, there's been a bunch of regulations that have been enacted as it relates to children in the foster care system. In fact, there was a new federal legislation that was passed just in 2014 that now requires child welfare agencies to ensure that children in foster care who are age 14 and older participate in the development of revision to or their case plan, which also must describe their rights. So when we're talking about these children and these unaccompanied minors who maybe are in foster care right now on the west side of the state of Michigan who came here without parents, any of them that are over 14, they have to be afforded the opportunity to have their rights explained to them and to participate in developing their case plan, so that they play an active role in what their future looks like, and that's by federal law. So we see that the federal government has really tailored a series of laws and regulations that go to further enhance the protection that children have in the foster care system over their religious rights. So, and this is recognized. There is a series of cases that in the bottom screen, there's a quote there by Catherine Ross, where because the Supreme Court has decided a bunch of cases and they've accepted the notion that even elementary school children can develop a deeply held religious belief that command respect under the Constitution. So this indicates that there is a recognition that even children can develop this deep sense of religiosity in their upbringing that can warrant protections. So just for the purposes here, foster care agencies are state actors. So as I stated before, like I can tell my children, you don't have a right to privacy in my home, and that's sort of true, and I can tell them all of these different things. However, when the state takes over taking care of a child when it's removed from their home, the state then becomes acting as the parent of the child. But in most states, like the state of Michigan, states are not directly involved in the placement or the care or the monitoring of children who are in foster care services. They contract out to different foster care placing agencies, and the foster care placement agencies then become the responsible adults in the child's life, but then they also step it kind of into the shoes of the state, and they take on all of the roles and responsibilities that a state would have had they been actually directing the care of the child. So what this means is foster care agencies can, for the purposes of civil rights actions, be held liable when a child who is under their care and custody has been deprived of a civil right. This has mostly been litigated with regards to abuse cases when children are removed into foster care systems and then they are abused in the foster care home. And the agency has reason to know that they had been abused. So if the agency knows that there's been a violation of the rights and they don't remedy it, they can be held liable for that. Foster parents cannot be held liable for a private right of action for a deprivation of rights, but the foster care agency can. So what this looks like with regards to religious rights is if the state knowingly fails to ensure that a child is able to exercise her constitutionally protected rights while in the foster care system, then the state itself has violated their rights and they can be held liable. It's also important to note that it is required by federal law that when foster care placing agencies choose a home, like which foster homes they're going to place children in, that they must consider best interest factors. So best interest factors include religion as a factor, whether the foster home is capable of bringing the children up in a religious and moral home, and whether the children's religion can be enhanced or practiced in that foster home becomes then a necessary factor for determination of when a foster placement is appropriate. And that also goes along lines with whether or not the home that the foster care agency is going to place the child in, whether it's religiously compatible with the placement, with the child's religion and the religion of the family that the child is coming from, and whether they can act in the best interest, or they can act in or allow and provide accommodations for the child to practice their religion in that home. So it becomes a test of whether the home is religiously compatible or not. And that's completely, despite the establishment clause, that's completely acceptable, and that's completely required under federal law. So what are some of the Michigan specific standards that we have? Michigan has had a unique set of circumstances, and I think it's largely in part to our large Muslim American community that we have here in southeastern Michigan. A few years back in the early 2000s, there was a family called Rehab and Ahmed Amr. They were Arab Muslims living in the city of Dearborn, and they had an unfortunate incident where one of their twins children had passed away in an accident in a bathtub. And that while they were investigating what had taken place in the home that led to that child's death, they had originally placed the child with Rehab's brother. After some time, it became evident that the foster care placing agency held some form of hostility to the religious practices of the brother. And they removed the child from the brother's home and placed them instead into the home of a Christian family. And it was a missionary style home. So when the children were placed there, they were actively being converted into Christianity. And after some time, the children had their names changed to Christian names away from their Arab Muslim names, and were converted into Christians, and then eventually adopted. It came out through a series of litigation that there was likely an actual medical reason for why the child had passed away, and it was not due to any negligence or intentional act by the parents. But at that point, it was too late. The children had already been adopted and converted. So as a result of that, and the problems that caused, and the ideology that these children had lost their heritage, they lost their nationality, and then they lost their religious upbringing. They were there was one older child in the home who had had some concept and some understanding of what his religious practices were before he was converted to Christianity. So as a recognition of the harm that caused, not just to the parents, but to the children themselves, Michigan passed what's called Amr's Law. And what Amr's Law requires is that the child is placed in the most family-like setting available, and is in as close proximity to the child's home as consistent with the child's best interest and any special needs that they might have. And what that really was intended to do, and the overall statute does, is it requires a look into what is the religion and the ethnicity of the child and the parents. And it requires the state to look at the homes, the foster care homes, and ensure that those foster homes are going to be the most family-like setting. They're going to be similar in nature to the homes that the children are coming out of. And that includes taking a look at religious compatibility, so that children are not being placed in homes that are actively trying to convert them or change them into something that they're not, or that they were not. Because could you imagine, as a child, everything that you know, the way you eat, the way you pray, the way you when and how you go to your religious services, you have a set circumstances, and then you're uprooted from your home, which is already a trauma, right? And then in addition to being uprooted from your home, you're uprooted from everything that you know and the way that you've normally done things, and then you're told that you have to change. So that's like an additional trauma. So there's a recognition that this is harmful to children, to uproot them in this way, and in a manner that takes them away from everything that they know. And also it's a recognition of their rights to have a continued consistency with their religion and their religious upbringing, even if they're small. This law does not have any requirements or any leeway for when children are younger or older. This is really something that's consistent no matter the age of the child, including infancy. We had a case very recently where there was a very tragic incident in Inkster where a mother had a mental health crisis and caused the death of one of her children and caused severe injuries to the second one. And the foster care, and the mother happened to be a convert to Islam, and her family was not Muslim. The father was in the middle of, was taken into for mental health services as soon as this happened, because he had a mental breakdown as a result of this incident. And the foster care placing agency placed with mom's family, and the remaining child was only about 18 months old. So you're talking about a very young child. And the family came to us, they were very concerned. They said the mother's family is not Muslims, but both the father and the mother in this case were Muslims, and these children are not they're not eating halal meat. They're being subjected to going to church and things like that. And we had to step in and contact the foster agency and say, listen, according to Amar's law, what you've actually done is a violation of Michigan law, and there are willing and capable members of the father's family, which are Muslim. The father wants these children placed in a Muslim home. He has the right to do that. He's not being accused of having done anything wrong, and his rights are not terminated. So we're asking you to put these children back into a Muslim home, and we were successful at doing that. And that's sort of what Amar's law kind of requires under those circumstances. The other thing that Michigan does that helps to protect the religious rights of children and the rights of the children in the foster care system is they appoint a lawyer guardian ad litem to represent the child. And this is a right that cannot be waived by the child, mostly because we know that children cannot waive something that they're in need of because they don't always know what they're in need of. And it's also cannot be waived by the parents. The parents are not allowed to retain a private attorney to represent the child, because we know sometimes in the foster care system, the children's interests and the parents' interests are not necessarily aligned, especially if the children have come in involuntarily as a result of like suspected abuse or neglect. So this is not something that can be waived. But what the requirement is that the children have access to the guardian ad litem, that they're able to contact the guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem should be contacting them on a frequent, if not regular basis. The guardian ad litem should be visiting the home, and the children should be and are legally allowed to speak freely with the guardian ad litem to express their interests about what should happen to them. This goes along with participating in their case service plan, especially if they're over 14, and also to express their concerns, including their religious concerns and their religious needs, should they have some that are maybe not being met or that they would like to have accommodated, so that the guardian ad litem can then go back and make that advocacy pitch for them. Because what we also know about children in foster care is there's a power differential, right? They've already been uprooted. They're in a system that they don't understand. They don't know how to navigate. There's a lot of adults involved, different adults, like their parents are involved, and then their foster parents are involved, and there's a host of attorneys that are also involved, and then they have this guardian ad litem. So sometimes they feel voiceless and powerless, and they can be persuaded to do things, or they can be afraid to do things or speak out because they're afraid of reprisals. So their guardian ad litem is supposed to be the person that they can go to with those issues. It's supposed to be their advocate. They're supposed to feel safe with them, and they're supposed to utilize them in the manner that they would be able to speak with them freely and be able to know that that person's going to go back and advocate that their needs get met. So that's one of the ways that Michigan specifically has instituted the rights of the enforcement of the rights of children. And according to Michigan law, the state must accord a child's parent a great deal of deference in making child rearing decisions. When we think about what it takes to raise a child, we're not just talking about the day-to-day discipline of a child, right? That's a lot of it. Like, don't do this, eat your beans, go to bed, take a shower. That's a lot of parenting, right? But when we talk about like the actual large decisions, where the child is going to school, does the child need special services or an IEP or a 504 plan when they go to school, and what does that plan look like? What are their health concerns, the vaccinations, surgeries, you know, just medical medicines in general, if they're going to be taking medicines, and their religion. What if religious decisions? Do they go to the masjid? Should they be praying? Should they be fasting? Along with religious tenets, those are all things that are afforded a great deal of deference when it comes to the state of Michigan. And that's important because that protects the reciprocal constitutional rights of the parent to guide the care and custody of their child, but also the child's right to have that guidance from their parents. So how does that look? These are just briefly, these are the responsibilities of the foster placing agency. We're not going to go too in depth of these because we're here just talking as parents today in the agency. But for the purposes of this slide, it is important to note that legally, the law treats foster parents as if they are employees of the state. So what does that look like? So normally when we were talking about religious rights and religious, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, I told you that the government cannot infringe upon your rights without, you know, a really, really good reason, a compelling government interest, which is a very fancy way of saying a very good reason, right? But that's when we're talking about the private, your right as a private citizen. However, the courts have determined that there are circumstances when a government acting as an employer can compel, has more leeway or more power to compel somebody to do or not do something in the form of a religious, with regard to their religious beliefs. Now they cannot necessarily compel you to give up your religious beliefs or like abdicate your religious beliefs to be a foster parent. But what that means is the state can compel foster parents to make reasonable efforts to accommodate the religious preference of the legal parents of the children that are in their care and of the foster children that are in their care. And that includes, you know, when the child has, especially when the child has professed what their religious or their sincerely held religious beliefs are. So what that looks like is, you know, we've had cases in the past where children are in homes and the home looks great, but the parent is saying, listen, my child is a 14-year-old boy. He's required to go to Friday Juma or like Muslim religious congregational prayer. He's 14, he's reached the age of puberty, he's required to go. But the foster parent is like, you know what, I'm not taking him because it's against my beliefs. Well, some effort has to be made to take that child. If that's a sincerely held religious belief, some effort has to be made to take that child. Does that mean that the foster parent has to go sit through a Muslim service? No, it does not. But a 14-year-old child could be dropped off to the masjid to a responsible adult. If they could be taken. There are a lot of accommodations that could be made. A reasonable effort has to be made to accommodate the sincerely held religious beliefs of the parents and the children. What that also looks like is it looks like the foster parents, if they're going to church on a Sunday or Saturday, or if they go to synagogue on a Saturday or a temple on the days you go to temple, then that means that they cannot necessarily compel children to go with them. And if it's the foster parents' sincerely held religious belief that they do that they themselves have to go, then accommodations need to be made for the children to be doing something else. And that may look like for younger children or, you know, even older children, because I have kids that probably, especially my boys who are like 16, I don't want to leave them at home for too long by themselves because I like my furniture the way that it is. But that might look like, you know, having you know, a babysitter come in and sit with the children for the whatever 2 hours or however long church services are, and then things of that nature. So that's kind of what that what that looks like. So one of the other things that that we touched on a little bit that I want to kind of go over here is religious compatibility. Religious compatibility is a factor in foster homes. And one of the things that it is not permissible to do, and that the foster care agency must do, is they must make sure that foster children are not placed in homes where the religious identity of the child is at harm or is at risk for being a factor in disparate treatment, right? So we can't be placing children, Muslim children, in homes where, you know, somebody is like, what happened to the Amers is somebody's actively trying to convert these children, because that is detrimental to the psyche of the child, is a violation of their rights. And foster care agencies have a duty to ensure that that is not taking place. And if that is taking place, they have a duty to remove the child and place a child to somewhere that is more compatible, because you cannot accommodate the religious needs of a child if you're openly hostile to them. And there is a power differential in the foster homes. Like we've heard, you know, we've heard from some of the children that are engaged in the foster care system, especially some of the ones whose parents are not here, that sometimes they don't want to make requests of their foster parents for what they want to do, or they don't want to make requests from they don't want to complain to their guardian ad litem or the foster care worker or the foster parent that maybe they don't want to go do a certain activity, like go to church, or that they're uncomfortable by a certain type of talk, because they're afraid that it will jeopardize their position here in the United States, or that by making a problem, it'll make it more difficult for their parents to be able to immigrate to the United States. Because a lot of these children, especially our Afghan refugee children that are here under the foster care system as unaccompanied minors, their goal really is to reunite with their parents, and they don't want to do anything that may jeopardize that, right? So there is this power imbalance that they feel. So we have a duty to ensure that they're not put in a position to really have to defend their religious beliefs or their religious practices in a home. Does that mean we're not having conversations, open conversations about religion so that we can get to know each other? No, that's not what that means. Obviously, we want everybody to get to know each other, and we, you know, the more we know about people, the more we understand about people, but we have to be very sensitive about the types of conversations that we're having, the types of materials that we're giving foster children to read, and the way in which we approach these conversations, to make sure that children know that their rights, that their beliefs are respected and valid, and that we're not doing anything to try to actively argue or change those beliefs, or diminish the importance of those beliefs, or create some kind of value judgment where the children are then put in a position to feel like their religion or their practices are second behind the religious practices of others, because that really goes to whether or not that home is a suitable fit based on religious compatibility. So I think that's it for that slide. So what does it look like to accommodate Muslims in the foster care system? So like I said before, foster parents can be compelled to provide to make reasonable efforts to provide religious accommodations for children that are in their that they're fostering in their home. What a reasonable effort looks like really is a fact-by-fact, case-by-case evaluation. It's done that way by the courts because it really is a subjective standard based on what the religious belief is of the person who's being affected, and how important that belief is to them. Like whether it's a fundamental belief that they have to do it, whether it's something that they prefer to do, and also is depending on how burdensome it is for the family that's fostering them. So it really is on a case-by-case basis. But some things that are pretty much non-negotiable would be making sure that the children who are Muslims have a place and the ability and the tools necessary to pray. Muslims pray 5 times a day, various times during the day. So, and we may need different things to pray, like a prayer rug, so we have a clean space to pray. Girls need hijabs to pray, like we have to cover our hair, it's a requirement. Having those in the home is a must. And they have these things called zikr beads. Zikr is a funny word, and I don't even think I say it right, but it's like these beads that you use them to count. And there's like certain things you say, like certain invocations you say when you're counting them, and it keeps count because you say them a certain amount of times. And all of those are really readily accessible on the internet. They're really readily accessible like throughout the state of Michigan, even on the west side, and they're relatively inexpensive. Something that's important, Muslims have some food restrictions that are not unique to Muslims, but are similar to Judaism, but also not exactly the same as it comes to our meat. Like homes that have Muslim foster children have to make a really strong effort to ensure that Muslim foster children are not eating pork, and that the food that they're eating is not cross-contaminated with pork products. Like, I mean, I'm a convert. I grew up with a very Southern family. A big deal in my family on Sundays was frying bacon and then frying eggs in bacon grease, right? That's a big deal. That's just kind of how it was done. But that's not something we can do with Muslim children. Like, we're not frying bacon and putting the bacon aside and then frying the eggs in the same pan, because that's creating this cross-contamination. So the avoidance of pork contamination in food for Muslim foster children is important. Also, a lot of Muslims believe that you have to eat halal meat, and halal has to do with the way that it's slaughtered and the way that the blood is drained, and there's a difference between hand slaughtered and halal non-hand slaughtered meat, but that's a conversation for a different day and a different person who has more knowledge than me. But there is a belief that Muslims have to eat halal meat. So if you have a child, especially an older child that's in your home, who says that they need to eat halal meat, that's an accommodation that's reasonable to make, especially in the state of Michigan, where we have ready access to halal meat. It's not more expensive than regular meat. And it's available widely across the entire state of Michigan. Another thing that is a reasonable accommodation is providing transportation to Juma, which is the Friday congregational prayer, to religious holiday prayer celebrations, and especially for those children who've reached the age of puberty. If a child has reached the age of puberty, those things become compulsory on them, meaning that it's a requirement. Even when children are in school, there's a lot of law that says that they have to be provided with the accommodation to be able to pray in school. And that includes praying the 5 daily prayers in school when they come into time, and also the congregational prayer. And there's a lot of different ways how schools accommodate that. Some of them let the children leave and go to the prayer and come back, and then they have to make up the work that they've missed. And some just hold their own congregational prayer on Fridays after school lets out. A lot of schools in this area do it. It really depends on how many Muslim students you have in your area and how accessible a masjid is. Providing access to religiously appropriate materials, educational resources, Qur'ans, and the Islamic community events. Religious education is a very important thing. It's important for every religion. The catechisms for Catholics. Then you have Saturday school for the Jewish children. They have that school. Then Muslims go to school too. We had a case very, very recently where a mother had her children removed. She had a disability, and the children had been attending Quran classes where they learn how to read and recite the Quran in the way that you have to read and recite it when you pray, and things like that. And they were placed in different foster homes, and the foster families did not want to take them to weekend school. And they did not want to continue this weekend education. And, we came in and said, listen, this is the right of the mom. This is the right of the child to continue this education. And, we want you, the mother's willing to, she was able to have visits at that point in time. The mother's willing to sit with them. You guys just have to take them and drop them off. And we were able to work that out, because it's seen as a religious right for these children to have access to religious education, especially younger children that might not have the fundamentals down because of, the developmental nature of children. Making arrangements for the children to observe the fasting during the month of Ramadan and other important holidays. When we fast for Ramadan and other important days throughout the Islamic calendar, we don't eat from sunup to sunset. We don't drink water. So what an accommodation might look like is making sure that before the pre-dawn prayer, which right now is about 6 a.m., 30 minutes before that, having them have something to eat, nutritious, that can, hold them for the day. And then the same thing, right now we're breaking our fast about 8:30 at night. So you having food ready for them at 8:30 in the evening when it's time to break the fast. Also allowing them, if we have family dinners are a big deal at my house. We still don't sit down at the table, everybody groans and complains about it, and then complains about their day for about a half an hour, 45 minutes every day. And then we get up and go about our business. But if we're doing this in a foster home that has Muslim children and non-Muslim children, allowing the Muslim children to be exempt from that family meal if it doesn't fall within the time frame allotted for eating, so that they're not sitting with everybody else eating, because then that becomes very difficult. And allowing them to take rests during the day and have quiet time for reflection during the periods of time when they're fasting is also important. We already talked about making provisions for the children to remain in the home or engage in other activities if foster parents are observing other religious services related to faiths other than Islam, and ensuring that foster children are not placed in homes that are open. This should say, I don't know, I didn't fix it since yesterday. Ensuring foster children are placed in homes that are open and welcome to accommodating children of the Muslim faith. That's the most important. Making sure that we're placing children with people who want to learn about the religion of Islam and want to make sure that children are accommodated in their faith and can have the materials that they need. So I think that is the presentation. I hope it was beneficial to everybody. This is just a brief overview of what it looks like, what the rights are of children in foster care and how that kind of plays itself out in like a real life setting, right? So we know what their rights are and kind of what does that look like. So I think we have a little bit of time, so I think that we can open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, then I'm gonna, I think, stop sharing my screen at this point.
Thank you so much, Amy. I think I really appreciated even more examples that you shared today, and some of your personal examples as well. So thank you so much. So we have a question in the chat box. So do children have to remain at home if foster parents go to other religious services, or only if they want to remain home?
So that's a very tricky question, right? So that's what I was talking about with, like, we have to be careful about the power differential when we were talking to foster children in general, right? So let me give you for instance, there's a recognition among psychologists and amongst the law that children of a certain age, especially young children, are inherently susceptible to persuasion and to coercion that's even sometimes accidental coercion, right? It's one of the reasons why we don't allow prayer in schools, especially elementary schools. It's one of the reasons why we don't allow religious talk in elementary schools. But sometimes we do under certain contexts when we talk about high school kids, right? And it depends on whether the child is asking to go to the religious services or whether or not we've introduced it in a way that where they feel like they don't have the power to say no, or they are unintentionally maybe coerced. And let me give you a for instance. We had the case with the children that I was just talking about that were being that we asked to have taken to Islamic educational services. Those same children, they were 3 small girls, all of them under the age of 9. One of the foster parents came, and the mother had said, absolutely not, I do not want my children to go to church. She had said that from the beginning. But one of the foster parents came and, was like, we're going to church. It's going to be Easter. It's going to be great. There's this thing called the Easter Bunny. We're going to do Easter egg hunts. There's going to be games. There's going to be candy. It's going to be so much fun. Do you want to go? And of course, the child was like, absolutely. I definitely want to go get a whole basket full of candy. And this sounds like a great time. And then they approached the parent in front of the child and said, your daughter has indicated that she wants to go to Easter services on Sunday. Is it okay if we take her? At that point, because the child is like, doesn't understand what's going on and like what church is, and that it's like against her religious beliefs to do so. And the mom is being asked in front of the child, who thinks that they're going to this really great party. Now the mom has said, yes, my daughter can go, but the mom is not happy about it, which is actually how we initially got involved in the case. And so that type of, it depends on how it's being presented. Are we are we presenting this as something where the children either feel powerless, that they can't say no, or is it because they're curious because they want to go? Is it an attempt to, change their mindset about what their religion is? It really depends on the intent of it. And it also depends on the age of the child. And it really also depends on whether or not we've had that frank conversation with their parents, because even though their parents are not here, for the most part, when we're talking about Afghan refugee minors, their parents still have to be involved. And if their parents, are adamant that they don't want their children to go to religious services other than Islamic religious services, then the answer is they have to stay home. If the children are being enticed to go in a power dynamic issue, then we shouldn't be doing that to begin with. But so it really depends on the age of the child and the framework for how the conversation about attending church services is coming up.
Thank you. And that was a really, really good question. Barb, I think that was very important to clarify. And it seems like from what Amy is saying, there's so many different factors that goes into it that have to be considered in that situation. And I think you already answered about there was a mistake on the screen of that word. So I think that was answered. Does anyone else have questions that Amy can answer?
Yeah, I was just going to tag on to what Amy said, that I think what I've really seen with some of our Afghan youth is that there's still so much uncertainty in their lives, and there is so much fear of saying or doing the wrong thing that they often are so respectful and so compliant with the foster family and the whole system, just because their lives are horribly uncertain. And I think we just have to really, really remember that, and that we don't know what's underneath that. I mean, I've even had a couple of experiences with a couple of boys who are very polite to a former foster family that they were in, who was, they had some issues with the church. The church issue was one of the issues. Very polite to that person, but then when you have him alone, he says, I don't want to be around them or be around their children, just because it puts him in such a horrible tension. And I think we need to remember that these are kids that are 12, 13, 14 years old. They're not ready to see the big picture, and they don't know if they say or do the wrong thing or make the wrong person upset, what the outcome might be. And I think it's hugely important that we respect that and are empathetic to that. And again, I would always think, like, what if one of our children, by no fault of their own, ended up plopped in another country, another culture, in a family that was practicing something that was not comfortable for them. That's, you're not, so much of this is beyond their control, and it's where you're born is where you're born, and what you're brought up with is what you're brought up with. And I think it's easy to think that our worldview is the worldview, but it's not. So
yeah, thank you for that, Barbara. That's actually hits the issue right on the head. These are children who are not capable of making that discerning decision, right? They know what they know, and they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what their life holds. And there are a lot of them that are afraid that they could be sent back, or that they won't be reunited with their parents, and they're willing to do things, and they don't want to disappoint people. So that's very important. And that's why religious conversations and conversations in general about going to church or doing religious activities have to be done in a very sensitive way, right? So that they don't feel unintentionally coerced, because I'm sure everybody's intentions are good. We want to include them, we want them to understand our point of view. So I'm sure that everybody's intentions are good, but it can really lead to some uncomfortable situations for the children, and that's what we kind of need to keep in mind.
Well, and I'll just say too, I was raised in a Christian home, and my husband is an Episcopal priest, and I went to a Lutheran college. But I also, as part of that, did a lot of comparative religion studies, and the foundational tenets of all of these are so parallel, and the values are so parallel, that there are ways that you can you can respect and honor all of those values without using the Jesus language. It's not, it's the same idea. And then it's kind of phenomenal how across the globe and people who've never talked to each other have the same feelings about we need to take care of each other and we need to care for one another and we need to take care of the earth and our bodies are a gift to us and we need to be careful with them. And I think, those are all things that you can honor without even getting into a religious conversation, and it's universal throughout different faith groups. So.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Yeah, so I just want to make sure if there's anyone else who has questions, we can give time and space for that. Yes, Peggy, go ahead.
Also adding to what Barbara was saying, my sons have been older when they come to me. They're 15, 16, 17. And I've had 4 Muslim sons, foster sons, and 2 were very religious. Our school district was very accommodating. They could not give them a prayer room with running water, which is what the boys needed. So they allowed them to leave school. They rearranged their schedule so they had a study hall so they could go to Juma on Fridays. And they eat halal. They're very good. The other 2 were not as strict, shall we say, I guess, for lack of a better word. But one of the things that I tried to do, and I do it not just with my sons, but also with other people. Barbara said about you don't have to bring the name Jesus into the conversation. We can talk about God, which is a much more general thing. I'm a Catholic. In our household, we have a Mennonite, which is a different Christian religion, and we had a Buddhist. I think we were only missing a Jew at one point. So it was a very ecumenical household. But we had conversations about God. And much to Barbara's point, there are so many ways that our religions touch on one another that provide a conversation. But again, my kids were older. I'm not talking about 8-year-olds, but I think it's important for especially people who are practicing Catholics, practicing Christians, to accommodate the others. Don't use the word Muhammad. You say that the prophet is what we say, and don't always talk about Jesus. Talk about God. Just because it's just being accommodating, but it seems to foster conversations within our family, which is good for everybody concerned, and everybody can see they actually can see the commonality, which is the point of the whole thing. So
yeah, I really like that. And I used to be Catholic, Peggy, so
okay. Well, when you threw out catechism, I thought, okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing. And I do think conversations are important, like, because that's how we get to know one another, right? That's through conversations, but approaching it. And I think you described every child in my household. We have some who do a lot and some who are doing very little.
Exactly.
And Christianity is that way too. I mean, the way I practice Christianity is far different from the way an evangelical Christian would practice Christianity. And well, in fact, my own bio sons have said they went to different youth groups and they would say, are they reading the same book? Because it was so not what they felt, the way they were brought up. So
exactly.
you just cannot make those generalizations.
Yeah. And I think, exactly that point, Peggy, that you brought up about from your experience, you notice how there's this range of practices, for example. And I think it's really important for all foster parents to know that there are going to be a range, and sort of that's about having that conversation with what the bio family and the children themselves are both expecting or wanting to do, and then meeting them where they're at, sort of.
Precise.
So much, everyone, for being here again. As Amy said, on this in the evening when you could all be doing something else. So we really appreciate you for being here and this wonderful open conversation and your hearts being open to this. And thank you, Peggy, for having four foster children. That's amazing. So we've all learned from you. And Amy, thank you so much again for your time and just your experience and your knowledge sharing with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
guys.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.